Hello, my name is Chris Baker, and I'm speaking as the head of the Lichfield Deanery Shaping for Mission team. This is a pre-recording of a presentation that I will give at the Deanery Synod meeting on the 16th of February 2022, and it's being made available for those who can't make the meeting or who wish to see again what was said during the course of the meeting. The slides will also be available as a handout that should be sent to all Deanery Synod members by the Secretary. Shaping for Mission is, of course, an exercise that was set in train by the Diocese of Lichfield in around October 2020, driven by two things. One, the need to make the mission in the diocese more effective and sustainable by a reshaping of deaneries to be effective bodies for developing discipleship, encouraging vocation and inspiring evangelism, to use the words of the diocesan aims and objectives. And at the start, and I should say the purple slides are slides that were prepared by the diocese rather than by me, the aims were to enable the parishes, schools and chaplaincies and fresh expressions in this diocese to be effective in developing discipleship and so on, to reshape the deanery structure to deliver the mission and ministry in an effective way, but with an underlying recognition that financial situation is not great, and there is a need to develop the strategic deployment of lay and ordained ministers and to reduce the number of paid posts over the next 3 years, looking to reduce something like 30 posts by 2023. So there is both a mission imperative and a financial imperative in with this. And we've been looking at this, a team of about 7 or 8 people of variable membership, over the last few months since October 2020, and looking at what we can say about the future and the mission of all the churches in the deanery that you can see there. There is actually one missed off, and I'll give a prize for anyone who can tell me what that is. From October 2020 to June 2021, we carried out, largely over Zoom at the time, the first exercise in developing the vision. And by June 2021, we'd arrived at that vision and we did share it to some degree. And in a sense, the vision is no surprise. It's to be the church in this place, to reach out to unchurched communities, to proclaim the gospel and to make disciples, and to develop comprehensive programs of evangelistic and discipleship groups across all parishes, to develop a high quality and sustainable online and live streaming presence across all parishes, to develop youth and family work, schools, fresh expressions, youth work, and so on, to engage in mission and church planting to those on the new, very large housing estates in the area, and to the developing online community, to deepen our involvement in community service initiatives, and I name those such as the food bank, Burnt Would Be a Friend, Places of Welcome, and so on, and to take forward initiatives for the care of God's creation, using our churchyards as places for worship, and through the developing diocesan vision for evangelistic and environmental communities and Forest Church. As I say, there's no great surprise there. If we think about the implications that might have for our deanery, we realize we need to move away from the culture of church autonomy and acknowledge our mutual dependence and interdependence, and realize that not all churches should be engaged in all possible activities, but ideally should collaborate with each other. We need, very seriously, to deepen the prayer life of all of our churches and to develop collaborative activities between churches across a complete range of activities: evangelism and discipleship, online worship, youth work, schools work, church planting, music, baptisms, weddings, and funerals. And we shared that vision, and there seems to have been general acceptance of it, which isn't really surprising because it's saying we just need to be the church as God has intended us to be. But then we moved on, and there was something of a hiatus, I show on the green slide now, over summer and autumn 2021, and that of itself is quite instructive. It was very difficult to find time for us to meet as a group. and that was an indication of the busyness and priorities that we had as we emerged from lockdown. And as we did emerge from lockdown, the restarting of church life was difficult, more difficult, I think, than many of us imagined, and sometimes quite traumatic. There was a difficult financial situation for many parishes, and indeed that still persists. And a new financial model was being implemented. So all sorts of things making life tricky for Shaping for Mission. And also, of course, there were ongoing discussions of resource deployment within the deanery without direct reference to Shaping for Mission. So over the summer and autumn, we had something of a hiatus in our discussions, but we finally got back together in about November time, 2021. And around that time, we decided that there should be two strands, two threads in our developing mission and vision. One to deepen the prayer life of the parish and deanery, and the other the development of a new deanery structure to enable the vision to go forward. And I'll use that picture of two intertwined threads here and there during the next few slides. The first, the prayer thread, I'm not actually going to talk about. I'm not downplaying its importance, but at Deanery Synod, this will have been talked about by the Reverend Rod Smith, and I'm not going to repeat what he says here. So I'm going to move on to talk about the development thread. How do we develop our deanery to fulfill the mission that we have in view for it? We begin by recognizing three types of parish within the deanery. What we call category 1, those churches and congregations where there's significant missional activity and growth, and there are some of those. The majority, though, I think fit within category 2, those congregations and churches where there's significant mission opportunities, generally with quite sound finances, but with largely elderly congregations who are frankly quite weary as we come out of the pandemic. And then there's category 3, those congregations that realistically are probably not sustainable for more than a few years because of elderly and aging congregations. And holding mission and ministry in tension for that range of parishes is quite difficult. In particular, categories 1 and 3 require quite different forms of oversight and ministry that aren't easily matched together. And carrying out both together can be a distraction from meeting the needs of both categories. So the principles we adopted: to protect the resources allocated to churches in category 1 so as not to impede their activities, encourage the development of mission in category 2 churches, and honour the life and history of category 3 churches and support them for the provision of suitable worship and pastoral care as they move through the process of declining numbers and declining activity. And I want to say more about that later. So the way forward. We see the way forward as twofold. First of all, for those churches in category 3, to create what we are calling a Lichfield Deanery Congregational Chaplaincy, headed by a full-time minister, to utilise the very considerable resource pool of retired clergy and readers that we have. We are blessed by having huge numbers of them, to provide for the pastoral and worshipping needs of these congregations. And secondly, to define a number of mission areas where groups of churches in categories 1 and 2 would share resources as appropriate to their needs and give them each other mutual support and encouragement. These could either be informal relationships or formal pastoral reorganisations. We are not specifying them at this stage. But let's look first at this Lichfield Deanery Chaplaincy that we're proposing. I think it needs to be very clear that there is no shame in being in a declining church whose future is limited. That's been the case. Such churches have existed throughout the history of Christianity and will continue to exist. What is important, I think, is to make sure that we manage that process in a way that honours the history and the life of the people who are there, who have been sincere and devout Anglicans for many years, and to provide for their needs and to help them to move forward into the future. What we're proposing is a full-time minister in the deanery leading a team of retired clergy and readers to provide worship on a regular basis, that monthly, weekly, or maybe just at festivals, for what we call the chaplaincy congregations, and to conduct pastoral offices, funerals, weddings, and baptisms as required in those churches. And for each of those churches to develop a plan for each parish to move to the next stage of its existence. That might be, for example, becoming festival churches, which is a bit of a catch-all for churches that basically have services at the major festivals. It might be, for example, help with the setting up of friends groups to help support the building. It might be to help repurposing of buildings. It might be to move towards closure. In any case, when this happens, the needs, pastoral and spiritual needs of existing congregations need to be continued to be met and must never be neglected. We haven't really thought this through in very great detail, but as an example, we might ask such congregations to pay for, say, 0.1 clergy, some cost towards a deanery administrator, and the expenses and upkeep of their church building. Parishes will retain their identity with PCCs and wardens while they're able to do so, and I'm very conscious that there are some parishes that are finding that increasingly difficult. Although a new structure might need to be devised for those parishes which cease to be able to do that, and ultimately new uses for the buildings would be required. So in summary, the chaplaincy idea seeks to look after people in the declining church situation, to honour their past and to help them move forward to whatever the future holds for them in a planned way, with as much help as possible. Mission areas are different. Mission areas, of course, what I'm going to talk about isn't anything to do with pastoral reorganisation in principle. It's more sharing across parishes. And we've tentatively proposed 4 mission areas. The first of them we will call the South Mission Area, which includes Little Aston, Stonor, Shenstone, Weeford, Heats and Whittington. A largely rural, but not wholly, of course, with Little Aston there, a largely rural area with similar issues and problems, where resources could be shared across parishes. Similarly, a rural northern mission area, containing the parishes of Alderwas, Kings Bromley, the Ridwares, and Witchner, where again, largely rural, largely similar problems, where we believe collaboration could be quite important. A Chase mission area, obviously the urban areas of Chasetown, Chase Terrace, Burntwood, Brown Hills, and also in this case some rural areas, and I'll say a little more about that, of Longdon, Farewell and Gentleshaw, Hammerwich. Which leaves, of course, the Lichfield mission area in the middle, containing the 3 Lichfield parishes and the parish of Wall, and the large housing estates that are being built at the north and the south of Lichfield. We think these are coherent parishes with similar needs that would do well to collaborate with each other. As I say, there might be some parochial reorganisation in the future, but we're not proposing that at the moment. There are, though, some fuzzy areas associated with this. Longdon is currently linked with Christchurch, of course, and it could fit geographically into the Lichfield area, although this would give a perhaps slightly uncomfortable rural-urban mix, something for discussion. Similarly, the rural areas of Longdon, Gentleshaw and Farewell could all fit into the northern mission area, but transport links between them aren't great, Well, they're horrible, I think. So is that a good idea? Again, something for discussion. And again, another fuzzy area is about the new estates in Fradley. Do these fit into the Lichfield rather than the northern area as they sort of run into the Street Hay new development? Again, I've talked with John Allen and Elizabeth Wall on this, and basically we don't really know at the moment, so that must remain a fuzzy area. So that's really where we've got to. The role of the deanery in that would be to provide a base for the chaplaincy minister plus an administrator, to facilitate deanery lay teams to provide expertise to congregations on a range of issues, building issues, live streaming and social media, safeguarding and so on, where we could share expertise. And perhaps to foster cooperation between parishes to obtain external support for youth work and other missional activities. The next steps, the two threads again. Prayer for the churches. One thing that needs prayer by individual churches is, where does your church fit in this? In particular, is the deanery chaplaincy idea an appropriate way forward for your church, something that you would welcome? Could it be for you? The other thing is, what's the particular charism of your church that can be shared? What do you do in your church well that could be shared with parishes around? Both items of prayer, by no means the only items for prayer, but ones that I think are important. In terms of the next steps in the development of the new structure, the other strand in the threads, we need to ensure that any posts that are filled in the near future, in the short term, are consistent with the proposed structure. And those appointed should have abilities and experience in areas that could be shared across any particular mission area. And that brings us on to that. And you see now I've reverted to a purple slide, and that's because now this is effectively what is required by the diocese. The diocese requires a detailed plan for the future, a plan that's consistent with the vision that we've adopted, a plan that is financially sustainable, a plan that includes the deployment of ministry, including stipendiary, self-supporting, traditional and innovative models of lay ministry, and the time phasing and changes of short-term financial implications around any pastoral reorganisation. The team have looked at this, and fundamentally, we cannot see how these diocesan requirements can be addressed by the current Shaping for Mission team. We simply don't have the range of expertise that is required. We believe that any future task group should contain deanery representatives and those from the diocese with financial planning and HR expertise, which is what's required when we start to talk about deployment. That group should have the ability to financially model and plan a range of different scenarios. Again, we need managerial and financial expertise to do that. And it may be, and some on the current SFM team think this is the case, that sector support for various activities, for example, youth work, is probably better provided at diocesan rather than deanery level, or at least multiple deanery level. So that's the position that we're in, ladies and gentlemen. And finally, I should say the final plan and resourcing decision should be decided and owned by senior staff in the diocese. We do not feel it appropriate that any deanery team should be taking these decisions themselves, and they must ultimately be owned by the diocese rather than just by the deanery. So, as I said, that is actually where we are at the Deanery Synod meeting. I will open it up to questions and discussion. I'm, of course, open to questions and discussion from anyone watching this video, but please send me an email or something of the sort, and I will try to respond as best I can. Thank you for listening.